The community center on Maple Street had seen better days. The paint on the walls was chipping, the wooden floors creaked with every step, and the fluorescent lights flickered just enough to be annoying. But for Rebecca, it was perfect. It was quiet, mostly empty in the evenings, and best of all, it had a piano. Not a good piano, mind you. The old upright in the corner was probably older than Rebecca herself. Half the keys stuck when you pressed them, and it hadn't been tuned in at least a decade. But it was there, and it was free to use, and that was all that mattered. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, after her shift at the public library ended at 6, Rebecca would walk the 3 blocks to the community center. She'd sign in at the front desk, wave to Mrs. Patterson, who ran the place, and make her way to that beaten-up piano in the corner of the main hall. Then she'd sit down and play. Simple melodies, mostly. Nothing fancy. Her fingers would dance across the yellowed keys, coaxing out whatever music the old instrument still had left in it. Sometimes she'd play songs from her childhood. Other times, she'd just make things up as she went along, letting her hands wander wherever they wanted to go. It made her happy, in a quiet, private sort of way that she didn't really share with anyone. Playing that old piano was like having a conversation with an old friend who never judged you, never expected anything from you, and was always there when you needed them. Things changed on a rainy Tuesday in October. Rebecca had just settled onto the piano bench, flexing her fingers and adjusting her posture, when she heard voices coming from the hallway. Loud voices. Confident voices. The kind of voices that fill up a room and demand attention. A group of people swept into the hall like a small parade. At the center was a tall man in his early 40s, wearing an expensive-looking black suit and carrying himself like someone used to being the most important person in any room. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and even from across the hall, Rebecca could see the gleam of his designer watch. Behind him trailed 3 or 4 other people. An assistant clutching a tablet and frantically taking notes. A younger woman carrying what looked like sheet music. A photographer with a camera hanging around his neck. Mrs. Patterson was leading the group. Talking quickly and gesturing around the space, Rebecca caught fragments of the conversation. ... So grateful you've agreed to teach here. Such an honor. Our humble little center... ... The man in the suit nodded graciously, but his eyes were scanning the room with what looked like faint disappointment. This was clearly not the type of venue he was used to. Rebecca turned back to the piano, hoping to avoid notice. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Just a simple piece, something soft and melodic that wouldn't disturb anyone. The notes floated through the air, a little rough around the edges because of the piano's condition. But pleasant enough. She was maybe 30 seconds into the song when she heard it. A laugh. Not a polite chuckle or a quiet giggle. A full, loud laugh that cut through the air like a knife. Rebecca's fingers stumbled on the keys. She stopped playing and turned around. The man in the suit was looking directly at her, and he was laughing. "Is that what passes for piano playing around here?" he said loud enough for everyone in the hall to hear. He wasn't even trying to lower his voice. "Good Lord, Patricia, you didn't tell me the standards were quite this ... local." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. "That's just Rebecca. She comes in to practice sometimes. She's not one of the students." "I should hope not," the man interrupted, a smirk playing on his lips. "If that's the level of talent you're working with, we have quite a job ahead of us." His entourage laughed nervously. The assistant kept her eyes on her tablet. The photographer looked uncomfortable, but the man himself seemed completely at ease, as if publicly mocking someone was just part of his daily routine. Rebecca felt her face burning. Her hands were shaking slightly as she lowered them to her lap. Every instinct told her to defend herself, to say something, to at least explain that she was just playing for fun on a broken piano. But the words wouldn't come. They stuck in her throat like stones. The man had already turned away, dismissing her from his attention as completely as if she'd never existed. He was walking toward the other side of the hall now, talking to Mrs. Patterson about where his piano would be placed, what kind of lighting he'd need, how many students he could take on for his masterclass series. "I'm Jeffrey Hayes," he was saying, his voice carrying across the space. "Perhaps you've heard of me?" I've performed at Carnegie Hall 17 times. I've recorded 8 albums. My last performance in Vienna sold out in under 2 hours. Rebecca had heard of him. Everyone who knew anything about classical piano had heard of Jeffrey Hayes. He was brilliant, technically flawless, and by all accounts, one of the finest concert pianists of his generation. He was also, apparently, a complete jerk. Rebecca stood up from the piano bench slowly. Her legs felt unsteady. She could hear Jeffrey still talking, his voice dripping with condescension as he explained to Mrs. Patterson what kind of serious students he'd be willing to work with. "I don't waste my time with amateurs," he was saying. "People who just want to bang on the keys for fun. This is an art form, Patricia. It requires dedication, discipline, natural talent. Some people have it, and some people—" He glanced back at Rebecca with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Some people should probably stick to listening." The small group laughed again, more comfortably this time. They were getting used to Jeffrey's humor, learning what their responses should be. Rebecca gathered her bag from the floor beside the piano bench. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was more anger than embarrassment. Who did this guy think he was? Sure, he was famous and talented, but that didn't give him the right to humiliate people. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. As she passed the group, Jeffrey didn't even look up. He was too busy examining the grand piano that had been brought in for his classes, running his fingers over the polished wood and nodding approvingly. "Now this," he said, "is an instrument worthy of real music?" Rebecca pushed through the double doors and out into the October evening. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold and damp. She stood on the steps for a moment, breathing hard, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Part of her wanted to never come back, to abandon the old upright piano and find somewhere else to spend her Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Somewhere she wouldn't have to risk running into Jeffrey Hayes and his perfect technique and his cruel laugh. But another part of her, a smaller but stronger part, felt something different. That part felt angry, determined, almost challenged. Rebecca looked back at the community center, at the warm lights spilling out through the windows. Inside, Jeffrey Hayes was probably still holding court, impressing everyone with his credentials and his confidence. He had no idea who she was, no idea what she'd been through, no idea that his casual mockery had just awakened something in her that had been sleeping for a very long time. As Rebecca walked home through the damp streets, her mind was already racing. She wasn't sure what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Jeffrey Hayes was going to regret laughing at her. Rebecca didn't sleep well that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard that laugh, that casual, dismissive sound that said she wasn't worth taking seriously, that she was just some amateur playing around on a broken piano. If only he knew. She got up at 3 a.m. and made herself tea. Standing in her small kitchen, watching the steam rise from her cup, Rebecca let her mind drift back to a time she usually tried hard not to think about. She'd been 16 when they told her she was gifted. Not just good at piano, gifted. The kind of talent that comes along once in a generation, her teacher had said. The kind that could take her anywhere she wanted to go. By 17, she was already performing in youth concerts across the state. By 18, she'd been accepted to Juilliard. Full scholarship. Her parents had cried. Her teacher had hugged her so tight, Rebecca thought her ribs might crack. Everyone said the same thing. You're going to be famous. You're going to be incredible. Rebecca had believed them. Why wouldn't she? When she sat at a piano, the world made sense. Her fingers knew exactly where to go. Music poured out of her like water from a fountain. Easy. Natural. Right? She'd been 19 when everything changed. It was a stupid accident, really. The kind of thing that shouldn't have mattered. She'd been driving home from a late rehearsal, tired but happy. The other car had run a red light. She'd swerved. The impact sent her car spinning into a telephone pole. Rebecca touched her right hand now, running her fingers over the scars that still marked her skin. The doctors had been amazed she'd survived. The nerve damage could have been so much worse, they told her. She should be grateful she still had full use of her hand. But it wasn't full use. Not really. Not for what she needed. The fingers still moved. She could type, right? Do everything a normal person needed to do. But the fine motor control, the precise coordination required for professional piano playing, the speed and accuracy needed for complex pieces, that was gone. She'd spent 2 years in physical therapy. 2 years of exercises, of slowly rebuilding strength and flexibility. 2 years of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could get back to where she'd been. It hadn't worked. Oh, she could still play. Simple pieces. Slow pieces. Things that didn't require the lightning-fast runs and perfect precision that concert pianists needed. But the dream of performing professionally, of making a career out of music, of becoming the person everyone said she would be, that dream was dead. She'd left Juilliard after her 2nd year. The school had been understanding, even offered to let her switch to music theory or composition. But Rebecca couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand being surrounded by other pianists who could still do everything she couldn't. Couldn't stand the pitying looks from professors who'd once called her exceptional, so she'd left. Changed her major to library science at a state school. Moved to this small town where nobody knew who she used to be. Found a quiet job where she could be, around books and silence. And could pretend that her old life had never existed. The piano at the community center had been an accident. She'd wandered in one day, seen it sitting there lonely and ignored, and couldn't help herself. Just a few minutes, she'd thought. Just to see if she remembered how. That had been 5 years ago. Rebecca finished her tea and set the cup in the sink. Dawn was starting to break outside her window. Pale light filtering through the clouds. Jeffrey Hayes had no idea who he'd laughed at. No idea that the amateur he'd mocked had once been told she could play circles around pianists twice her age. No idea that the simple melody he'd dismissed had been her way of holding on to. The one thing she'd loved most in the world, and maybe that should have been enough. Maybe she should have just let it go, accepted that her playing days were behind her, moved on with her quiet library life. But something had shifted last night. Something had woken up. Rebecca walked to the closet in her hallway and pulled down a box from the top shelf. Dust covered the lid. She hadn't opened it in years. Didn't like to, most of the time. Too many memories? Too much pain. Inside were her old sheet music collections. Dozens of pieces, ranging from beginner exercises to advanced concert repertoire. She flipped through them slowly, her fingers tracing the notes on the page. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Liszt, Beethoven, all the composers. She'd once played with ease. All the pieces that now seemed impossibly difficult. At the bottom of the box was a program from her last performance before the accident. A youth concert at a university auditorium. She'd played Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The review in the local paper had called her interpretation hauntingly mature for someone so young. Rebecca stared at the program for a long time. Then she closed the box and put it back on the shelf. She called in sick to work that morning. First time in 3 years. Her supervisor sounded concerned, told her to rest and feel better. Rebecca felt guilty for lying, but not guilty enough to change her mind. Instead, she drove across town to the music store. The bell jingled as she pushed open the door. The owner, an older man named Vincent, looked up from behind the counter. "Rebecca, haven't seen you in here in ages. What can I do for you?" "I need to rent a piano," she said. "A good one. Can you deliver it to my apartment?" Vincent's eyebrows rose. "A rental? Sure, we can do that. How long do you need it for?" "I don't know yet. A month, maybe more. Mind if I ask what brought this on?" Rebecca smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Let's just say I need to remember something I forgot." The piano arrived 2 days later. It took 3 men and a lot of careful maneuvering to get it up the stairs and into her living room. It wasn't a concert grand, but it was good. Properly tuned. Responsive keys. The kind of instrument that could handle whatever you asked of it. Rebecca sat down at the bench that evening and placed her hands on the keys. They felt foreign and familiar at the same time. Like greeting an old friend you hadn't seen in years, she started with scales. Basic exercises. Her right hand protested immediately, the scar tissue pulling tight. fingers moving just a fraction slower than they should. She pushed through the discomfort, forcing her hand to remember patterns it had once known by heart. After an hour, her hand was aching. After 2 hours, it was throbbing. But Rebecca didn't stop. She moved on to simple pieces, things she'd learned as a teenager. The muscle memory was still there, buried deep, waiting to be uncovered. It wasn't pretty. Her timing was off. She hit wrong notes. Her right hand stumbled over passages that should have been smooth, but it was something. It was a start. Over the next week, Rebecca fell into a routine. She'd go to work at the library, smile at patrons, help them find books, check out returns. Normal life. But the moment she got home, she'd go straight to the piano. 3 hours every evening, sometimes 4. Her fingers started to callous again. The ache in her right hand became constant, a dull throb that she learned to ignore. She worked through her old exercise books, slowly building back speed and coordination. She wasn't trying to get back to where she'd been. That was impossible, and she knew it. But maybe she could get close. Maybe she could get good enough. Good enough for what? She wasn't entirely sure yet. But every time she thought about stopping, she'd hear Jeffrey's laugh in her head. See his dismissive wave. Hear him tell Mrs. Patterson that some people should stick to listening. 2 weeks after the incident at the community center, Rebecca pulled out the Chopin Ballade. The piece she'd played at her last performance. The piece that had once come so naturally to her. She put the sheet music on the stand and stared at it. The notes seemed to swim on the page. So many of them, so fast. So complex, her right hand would never handle it the way it once had. The runs were too quick, the jumps too precise. This was a piece for someone with perfect technique. Someone whose hands worked exactly as they should. But maybe, Rebecca thought, there was another way. She began to play slowly at first, figuring out how to adapt. Where she used to use her 4th finger, maybe she could use her 3rd. Where she used to make a big leap, maybe she could adjust her hand position earlier. Where speed had once carried her through difficult passages, maybe dynamics and emotion could do the work instead. It was like solving a puzzle, finding new paths to the same destination. And as Rebecca worked hour after hour, day after day, something unexpected happened. She started to love the piano again. Not in the way she had as a young prodigy, when everything came easy, but in a deeper way. A way that understood struggle and loss and the choice to keep going anyway. Jeffrey Hayes had laughed at her talent, had dismissed her without a second thought. He had no idea what he'd started. Rebecca hadn't been back to the community center since that Tuesday night 3 weeks ago. She couldn't bring herself to face it. Every time she thought about walking through those doors, she remembered Jeffrey's laugh echoing through the hall. So when Mrs. Patterson called her on a Wednesday afternoon, Rebecca almost didn't answer the phone. Rebecca, dear. I hope I'm not bothering you at work. Mrs. Patterson's voice was warm but hesitant. It's fine. We're not busy right now. What's going on? There was a pause. Rebecca could hear papers rustling in the background. I need to talk to you about something. Could you possibly stop by the center this evening? I promise Jeffrey won't be here. He only teaches on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. I don't know if that's a good idea. Please, dear. It's important. And I owe you an apology. Something in the older woman's voice made Rebecca agree. After her shift ended, she walked the familiar 3 blocks to the community center. The October evening was cool, leaves crunching under her feet. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in her small office, 2 cups of tea already poured. She stood when Rebecca entered, and to Rebecca's surprise, she looked upset, maybe even angry. Sit down, please, Mrs. Patterson said. Gesturing to the chair across from her desk, Rebecca sat, wrapping her hands around the warm teacup. First, I need to apologize, Mrs. Patterson began. What Jeffrey said to you that night was cruel and completely uncalled for. I should have said something right then. I should have defended you. But I was so flustered, having someone famous in our little center, and I just froze. It's okay, Rebecca said quietly. You don't have to apologize. Yes, I do. Because I've spent the last 3 weeks watching that man teach, and I've learned something. Talent and kindness don't always go hand in hand. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. He's brilliant, no question. But he treats half his students like they're wasting his time. I've seen 3 people quit already. Rebecca took a sip of her tea, not sure where this conversation was going. Here's the thing, Mrs. Patterson continued, leaning forward. The center is having its annual fundraiser gala in 3 weeks. It's our biggest event of the year. We usually have performances, dinner, dancing. People donate money to keep this place running. I remember. I came last year. Good. Then you know it's important. Mrs. Patterson took a breath. Jeffrey has agreed to perform. It's going to be the highlight of the evening. Everyone's excited about it. Tickets are selling faster than ever. Rebecca nodded slowly, still not understanding why she was here. I want you to perform too. The words hung in the air between them. Rebecca almost dropped her teacup. What? No, absolutely not. Hear me out, please. Mrs. Patterson, I can't. You don't understand. I'm not a performer. Not anymore. I just play for myself on that old piano, and even that's not very good. That's not true, and you know it, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. Rebecca, I'm not blind, and I'm not deaf. I've been running this center for 32 years. I taught music for 20 years before that. I know real talent when I hear it. Rebecca stared at her tea, feeling her face grow warm. When you play, even on that beaten-up old upright, there's something there. Something genuine. I heard it the first time you came here 5 years ago, and I've heard it every time since. Ain't. Mrs. Patterson paused. And I also know that you're hiding something. Rebecca's head snapped up. What do you mean? The older woman's expression softened. I know you've had training. Real training. The way you sit, the way your hands move, even when you're playing something simple. That's not self-taught. That's years of proper instruction. Rebecca felt her chest tighten. She'd been so careful never to mention her past. Never to give anyone a reason to ask questions. I don't talk about that part of my life, she said finally. I'm not asking you to, but I am asking you to consider performing at the gala. Mrs. Patterson reached across the desk and gently touched Rebecca's hand. That man humiliated you in front of everyone. He laughed at you. Don't you think he deserves to see what you're actually capable of? I'm not capable of much anymore, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was an accident. I can't play the way I used to play the way you can now. That's enough. It's not. You don't understand. People at that gala, they're going to hear Jeffrey Hayes perform perfectly. If I go up there and stumble through something, it'll just prove he was right. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. My oldest friend Helen taught piano in Boston for 40 years. Retired now. But back in the day, she taught some students who went on to do amazing things. She paused. About 6 months ago, she was visiting and saw your name on our sign-in sheet. She asked if you were the same Rebecca who'd been accepted to Juilliard about 10 years ago. She'd heard about you from colleagues, said you were supposed to be something special. Rebecca felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. I didn't say anything to you because I figured if you wanted people to know, you'd tell them. But now I'm wondering if maybe you need to remember who you were. Not to become that person again, but to remember that you had that in you once. That it's still in there somewhere. Rebecca stood up abruptly. Her heart was pounding. I need to think about this. Of course. But Rebecca, the gala is 3 weeks away. If you're going to do this, I need to know soon. And I'll need to order a proper piano. That old upright won't do. Rebecca walked home in a daze. Her mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other like water in a stream. Perform at the gala. In front of everyone? In front of Jeffrey Hayes? It was crazy. She'd been practicing again, sure, but 3 weeks wasn't enough time. The Chopin ballade was still rough. Her right hand still ached after an hour of playing. She made mistakes in passages that should have been easy. But as she walked, another thought crept in. What if she could do it? What if she could stand on that stage and play something real, something true, and show Jeffrey Hayes that his casual cruelty had been wrong? Not to prove she was better than him. She'd never be technically better than Jeffrey Hayes, but maybe to prove that music wasn't just about perfection, that it was about heart, about meaning, about connecting with something deeper than notes on a page. When Rebecca got home, she went straight to the piano. She sat down and put her hands on the keys. The Chopin Ballade was open on the music stand. It's marked up now with her notes about fingering changes and technique adjustments. She played through the opening section. It was better than it had been last week. Still not perfect, but better. The melodies sang out, melancholy and beautiful. Her right hand stumbled in the fast passage near the end of the first page. She stopped, went back, played it again slower. Then again. And again, this was the thing about piano playing that most people didn't understand. It wasn't magic. It wasn't just talent. It was work. Hours and hours and hours of work. Repetition until your muscles remembered. Practice until the impossible became merely difficult, and the difficult became manageable. Rebecca had done this before. She'd put in the work. She'd transformed herself from a decent player to a prodigy through sheer determination and practice. The accident had taken away her easy path. But maybe determination was enough. She played until midnight. Then she picked up her phone and texted Mrs. Patterson. "I'll do it. But I need a favor. Can I practice at the center when Jeffrey isn't there? The acoustics in my apartment aren't great." The response came back within minutes. "The center is yours whenever you need it. I'll give you a key tomorrow. And Rebecca, thank you. You're going to show that arrogant man what real music sounds like." Rebecca set down her phone and looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly. From exhaustion, from nerves, from excitement. 3 weeks. That's all she had. 3 weeks to prepare a piece that had once taken her months to perfect. 3 weeks to rebuild technique that had taken years to develop the first time. It should have felt impossible. But as Rebecca returned to the piano and began to play again, something interesting happened. She smiled, because impossible had never stopped her before, and it wasn't going to stop her now. Jeffrey, Hayes had laughed at her, had dismissed her without a second thought. In 3 weeks, he was going to learn that some people don't stay down when you knock them over. Some people get back up stronger. The next 3 weeks became a blur of work, practice, and more practice. Rebecca would finish her library shift, grab a quick dinner, and head straight to the community center. Mrs. Patterson had given her a key, as promised, and made sure the schedule was clear on the evenings when Rebecca needed to practice. The first few days were brutal. Rebecca would arrive full of determination, sit at the better piano Mrs. Patterson had moved into the main hall, and immediately feel overwhelmed. The Chopin Ballade wasn't just difficult, it was a mountain. And her hands, especially her right hand, felt like they were trying to climb that mountain, wearing heavy boots. On the third night, she broke down crying halfway through the piece. Her right hand had seized up, the muscles cramping so badly she had to stop playing. She sat there on the piano bench, tears running down her face, wondering what she'd been thinking. How could she possibly pull this off? Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson, even though it was almost 10 at night. "How's it going, dear?" Rebecca wiped her eyes and typed back. "Honestly, I'm not sure I can do this." The response came quickly. "You can, but you don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to do it truthfully." Rebecca stared at those words for a long time. Do it truthfully. What did that even mean? She looked down at her right hand, at the scars that traced across her palm and up her wrist. This hand had been broken. It had been rebuilt. It would never be what it once was, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the scars were part of the story now. Rebecca placed her hands back on the keys and started again. But this time, she didn't try to play it the way she would have 10 years ago. She played it the way she could now. Slower in some places, different fingering in others. More emphasis on the emotion than on technical perfection. And something shifted. The music started to breathe. It started to feel real. From that night on, Rebecca approached the piece differently. She stopped trying to recreate her 19-year-old self and started figuring out who she was now. A pianist who'd survived something, who'd lost something, Who was still here anyway? She practiced every evening. 2 hours. 3 hours. Sometimes 4 when she lost track of time. Her fingers developed new calluses. Her back ached from sitting on the bench. Her right hand protested constantly. A dull throb that became her constant companion. But slowly, measure by measure, the piece started to come together. On the Tuesday of the second week, something awkward happened. Rebecca had arrived early, around 6, planning to get in some practice before Jeffrey's class started at 7:30. She was deep into the middle section of the ballade when she heard the front doors open. She stopped playing immediately, her heart jumping into her throat. Footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Jeffrey appeared in the doorway of the main hall, his designer coat draped over one arm, looking surprised to see anyone there. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Rebecca felt frozen on the piano bench. Jeffrey's expression was unreadable. "I didn't realize anyone else used this space in the evenings," he said finally. "I have permission from Mrs. Patterson," Rebecca replied. Hating how defensive she sounded, "I'm sure you do." He walked closer, his shoes clicking on the floor. "What were you playing just now?" Rebecca's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs to hide it. "Chopin, Ballade No. 1. His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an ambitious piece, even for experienced pianists." Was he mocking her again? Rebecca couldn't tell. His tone was neutral, almost curious. "I'm working on it for the gala," she said, lifting her chin slightly. Ah, something flickered across Jeffrey's face. Surprise. Doubt. Mrs. Patterson mentioned we'd have multiple performers this year. He moved closer to the piano, and Rebecca tensed. But he didn't say anything cruel. He just looked at the sheet music on the stand, marked up with her notes and fingering changes. "You've made some interesting adaptations here," he said, pointing to one of her annotations. "Substituting the third finger for the fourth in this run. That's not how it's typically played. But it works better for me this way." Jeffrey tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then he looked at her right hand, and Rebecca saw the moment he noticed the scars. His expression changed. Just a fraction, but enough that Rebecca noticed. Some of the smugness seemed to drain away, replaced by something that might have been understanding. Or maybe pity. Rebecca wasn't sure which would be worse. "Well," he said after a moment, "good luck with your practice." He turned and walked away, leaving Rebecca sitting there confused and shaken. That wasn't what she'd expected. No laughter this time. No cutting remarks. Just an awkward, almost normal conversation. She didn't know what to make of it. The days continued to blur together. Rebecca's co-workers at the library started commenting on how tired she looked. Her supervisor gently suggested she might be working too hard. Rebecca just smiled and promised to get more rest, knowing full well she wouldn't. The piano had become an obsession. Every spare moment she was thinking about fingering, about phrasing, about how to make the difficult passages work with her damaged hand. She dreamed about the ballade at night. She woke up with melodies running through her head. With 1 week to go, Mrs. Patterson scheduled a rehearsal. She wanted to hear how Rebecca was progressing, and make sure the technical setup would work for the gala. Rebecca arrived on a Sunday afternoon to find Mrs. Patterson waiting with another woman she didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, elegant. She stood when Rebecca entered. "Rebecca, this is my friend Helen. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted her to hear you play." Rebecca's stomach dropped. Helen, the woman who'd taught in Boston. Who'd heard about Rebecca's Juilliard acceptance all those years ago. "It's lovely to meet you," Helen said warmly, extending her hand. "Patricia has told me so much about you." They shook hands, and Rebecca tried to ignore the way her palm was sweating. "I'm just going to play through the piece once," Rebecca said, moving to the piano. "It's not perfect yet. I'm still working on some sections." "Just play," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "We're not here to judge." Rebecca sat down, took a deep breath, and began. The opening notes floated into the air. Soft. Melancholy. The melody that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 3 weeks. Her fingers moved across the keys, and Rebecca let herself sink into the music. The first section went well. The difficult middle passage was rough in places. her right hand stumbling slightly, but she pushed through. The emotional climax near the end built the way she'd practiced. Loud and powerful and raw. When she played the final notes, the room fell silent. Rebecca sat with her hands in her lap, breathing hard, afraid to look up. "Oh, my dear," Helen said finally, and Rebecca heard something in her voice that made her glance up. The older woman had tears in her eyes. "That was remarkable," Helen continued. "Not perfect, no, but honest." So deeply honest, Mrs. Patterson was nodding, also looking emotional. "That's what I've been trying to tell you, Rebecca. That's what makes music matter. Not perfection. Truth." Rebecca felt her own eyes welling up. "It's not as good as it should be. The technical parts, I mean. My hand can't do everything it needs to." "Your hand is doing exactly what it needs to," Helen said firmly. She stood and walked over to the piano. "You know what I heard just now? I heard someone who understands loss, who understands struggle, who's still choosing to create beauty anyway. That's not something you can teach. That's something you earn." "Jeffrey Hayes is going to play perfectly," Rebecca said quietly. "Everyone's going to hear the difference. Let them," Mrs. Patterson said. "Let them hear both of you and decide what moves them more." Rebecca looked down at her scarred right hand resting on her knee. 3 more days until the gala. 3 more days of practice. 3 more days to prepare, and then she'd stand on that stage, in front of everyone, in front of Jeffrey Hayes, and play. Not perfectly, but truthfully, the thought terrified her. But it also made her feel more alive than she had in years. "Same time tomorrow?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Rebecca nodded, already thinking about which sections she needed to work on that evening. Same time tomorrow. 3 more days. That's all she had left, and she was going to make them count. The night of the gala arrived faster than Rebecca expected. She'd spent the entire day in a state of nervous energy, unable to eat, unable to focus on anything except what was coming. The community center had been transformed. White lights hung from the ceiling. Tables covered in elegant cloths filled the space. The old wooden floors had been polished until they shined. In the corner where the beaten-up upright piano usually sat, there was now a beautiful grand piano, its black surface gleaming under carefully positioned spotlights. Rebecca arrived 2 hours early. Wearing a simple black dress she'd bought specifically for tonight, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She walked straight to the piano and sat down. Needing to feel the keys under her fingers before the room filled with people, she played a few scales. Tested the pedals. The piano was gorgeous, responsive, and perfectly tuned. So different from the old upright she'd first played that Tuesday evening when Jeffrey had laughed at her. Had that really only been 6 weeks ago? It felt like a lifetime. "You're here early," Mrs. Patterson's voice made Rebecca jump. The older woman smiled apologetically. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. Just wanted to check if you needed anything." "I'm terrified," Rebecca admitted. "I know, but you're also ready." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her shoulder gently. "Jeffrey performs first. Then you." "I set it up that way intentionally." Rebecca's stomach flipped. "You want me to follow him?" "I want people to hear both of you. To understand that there's more than one way to be brilliant." People started arriving around 6:30. Rebecca watched from backstage as the hall filled up. She recognized faces from around town. Regular library patrons. Local business owners. The mayor was there, shaking hands. Even some people from the next town over who'd heard that Jeffrey Hayes would be performing by 7. Every seat was full. The energy in the room was electric with anticipation. Mrs. Patterson took the small stage to welcome everyone. She talked about the community center, about how donations tonight would help fund programs for kids who couldn't afford music lessons. Then she introduced Jeffrey Hayes. The applause was thunderous. Jeffrey walked onto the stage, looking every bit the professional pianist, confident, polished, in his element. He sat at the grand piano, adjusted the bench, and began to play. Rebecca watched from the wings, her heart pounding. He'd chosen a Liszt piece. Technical, flashy, incredibly difficult, and he played it flawlessly. Every note was perfect. Every run was clean. His fingers flew across the keys with the kind of speed and precision that only comes from decades of dedicated practice. The audience was mesmerized. Rebecca could see faces in the crowd, watching with open mouths. Some people were recording on their phones. When Jeffrey played the final crashing chords, the entire room exploded with applause. People stood up. Someone whistled. Jeffrey took his bows with practiced grace, soaking in the admiration. As he left the stage, he walked past Rebecca in the wings. Their eyes met for just a second. He didn't smile, didn't smirk, just gave her a small nod before disappearing into the crowd. Rebecca's hands were trembling. So badly now she had to clasp them together. How could she follow that? Jeffrey had been perfect, absolutely perfect. And she was about to go out there and play a piece that she knew had flaws. That would show every limitation her damaged hand had. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her. "You're up, dear." "I can't do this," Rebecca whispered. "Did you hear him? Did you see how the crowd reacted?"
I did.
"Now let them hear you. It's not the same." "I'm not him," no, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You're not. You're you. And that's exactly what you should be." Before Rebecca could respond, Mrs. Patterson was walking onto the stage. The crowd quieted down, people returning to their seats. "Our next performer," Mrs. Patterson began, "is someone very special to this community center. For 5 years, she's been coming here, playing on our old piano. It's asking for nothing in return except a quiet place to make music. Many of you don't know her story. She doesn't talk about it much. But I want you to know that she was once told she could become one of the great pianists of her generation. Life had other plans. But tonight, she's here to share her music with all of you. Please welcome Rebecca." The applause was warm but uncertain. People were being polite, but Rebecca could feel the confusion in the room. After Jeffrey Hayes, who was this nobody? She walked onto the stage. The lights were bright in her eyes, making it hard to see individual faces in the crowd. But she could feel them all watching, judging, comparing her to what they'd just witnessed. Rebecca sat at the piano bench, the same bench Jeffrey had just occupied. She looked down at her hands on her lap, at the scars on her right hand that told the story of everything she'd lost. She placed her fingers on the keys and took a breath. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's ballad drifted into the silent. Hall soft, gentle, melancholy. Rebecca closed her eyes and let the music flow through. She wasn't thinking about Jeffrey anymore. Wasn't thinking about the crowd. Wasn't even thinking about the notes on the page. She was just feeling. Every emotion she'd experienced over the past 10 years poured into the music. The pain of the accident. The grief of losing her dreams. The loneliness of starting over. The small joy of finding that old piano. The determination that had carried her through the last 6 weeks. Her right hand stumbled slightly in the first difficult passage. She heard it. The audience probably heard it too. But she didn't stop. She kept going, letting the imperfection be part of the story. The piece built in intensity. The middle section, where her hand struggled the most, came alive with emotion rather than technical perfection. Where Jeffrey's playing had been about control, Rebecca's was about release. About vulnerability. About showing every scar and playing anyway. Tears started running down her face as she approached the climax. She didn't try to hide them. This was the truth of who she was. Someone broken who'd found a way to make music anyway. The final section crashed through the hall, loud and raw and powerful. Rebecca poured everything she had into those last measures. When she played the final notes, she kept her hands on the keys for a moment, head bowed. Completely spent, the silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then someone started clapping. Rebecca looked up, tears still on her cheeks. The entire room was on their feet, but they weren't just applauding politely. Some people were crying too. She could see faces in the crowd, people genuinely moved by what they'd heard. The standing ovation went on and on. Rebecca stood shakily, taking a small bow, overwhelmed by the response. As her eyes adjusted to the lights, she found Jeffrey Hayes in the front row. He was standing with everyone else. and he was clapping. Really clapping. Not the polite golf clap of someone being courteous, but genuine applause. His expression was completely different from that first night. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect. After she left the stage, Rebecca had to sit down in a back room. Her whole body was shaking. People kept coming to find her, strangers telling her how beautiful her performance was, how moved they were, how they'd never heard anything quite like it. Helen found her first, giving her a long hug. "That was extraordinary," she whispered. "Truly extraordinary." Mrs. Patterson was next, crying happy tears. "You did it. You showed them all." It. Then the door opened again, and Jeffrey walked in. Rebecca stood up automatically, not sure what to expect. Jeffrey closed the door behind him, leaving them alone. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "A real one this time." Rebecca didn't say anything, just waited. "6 weeks ago I laughed at you. I dismissed you without knowing anything about you. Without understanding what you'd been through or what music meant to you." He paused, looking uncomfortable in a way she'd never seen. "I've spent my whole career chasing perfection. Every note has to be right. Every technique has to be flawless. I thought that was what mattered." "It does matter," Rebecca said softly. "It matters. But it's not everything." "What?" Jeffrey shook his head. "What you played tonight wasn't perfect. But it was real. And it moved people in a way my technically flawless list didn't. That's something I've forgotten along the way." They stood there for a moment. Two pianists from completely different worlds. "I'm sorry," Jeffrey said again. "For everything." Rebecca nodded. "I appreciate that." He left after that, and Rebecca was alone with her thoughts. She looked down at her scarred right hand, at the fingers that had just played a piece she never thought they could handle again. She'd spent 10 years running from who she used to be, hiding from her past, playing simple songs on a broken piano because she was afraid to reach for more. But tonight, she'd reached. And maybe she hadn't played perfectly. Maybe she'd never play in Carnegie Hall like Jeffrey Hayes. Maybe her technical ability would never match what it once was, but she'd stood on that stage and played with everything she had. With all her scars showing, with all her imperfections on display, and people had heard her, really heard her. That was enough. More than enough. Rebecca smiled through her tears and walked back out to join the celebration, ready to finally stop hiding and start living again.